Nothing impacts the feeling of a piece of music quite like harmony. And in this video, I'm going to teach you about the fundamentals of harmony so you can supercharge the emotional impact of your music. Let's get to the video. Hey everyone, Rex here from the Maze Music Academy, where I help musicians just like you level up your music making so you can succeed in your music career. Welcome to part 3 of my series on the 5 essential elements of music, where we're going to dig deep into the second element, which is harmony. If you missed the previous videos in this series, I encourage you to hit the pause button and go and check those out before you continue. You can find links to each of the videos in this series in the description below. So I'm going to give a little bit of a disclaimer. Out of all the 5 elements of music, harmony is one of the ones that's a little bit more complex. And I don't really want to dig too deep into the technical aspects of harmony in this video, but I'll have tons of other videos where I'll go into specific chords and chord progressions and all kinds of things like that, so you can check those out later. For this video, let's focus on harmony at a very high level so that you can really just start getting going and improving the harmony in your music. So harmony and the next element, melody, are the 2 elements of music that deal with pitch, which is how high or low the tones in your music are. And harmony is what I like to describe as the vertical element of pitch in your piece of music, because it deals with different pitches played simultaneously to create what are called sonorities. So even if you don't have a lot of music experience, you probably already know some of the terminology that we use when we talk about harmony in music. The most important is being the word chord, which is just a name for a standardized set of notes played together. And the most common of those are triads, which are simple 3-note chords that are used in virtually every style of music to some degree, and they're standardized. You have things like major chords and minor chords. Major chords being kind of bright and happier sounding, whereas minor chords sound a little darker, a little bit sadder, more morose. And you use these different kinds of chords, these triads, to paint different emotional pictures in your music. So one of the cool things about pitch in music is that there's only 12 distinct pitches that we actually use, and those are just repeated higher or lower across the pitch spectrum across the keyboard. And what that means is it makes it a lot easier for musicians like us it really limits the number of combinations that you can have. There's only so many 3-note combinations you can have. Only so many 4-note or 5-note combinations that you can have. So that makes it a lot easier to standardize different chords and chord progressions, which are a series of chords, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we compose a piece of music or perform a piece of music. So now, as I mentioned before, triads are the most common kinds of harmonies that are seen in virtually every style, and they're really prevalent in pop music styles to kind of keep things simple, easy to consume, very light on the ear in that way. They can kind of convey a simple message. But you can go well beyond 3 notes in your chords. You can have 4, 5, 6 plus notes in your chords to make more complex sounds, which you hear a lot more in classical music styles, in movie scores and video game scores, and especially styles that incorporate jazz. Those use a lot of complex extended chords in their harmonies and chord progressions. Now, all these chords I've been talking about, triads and extended chords, are all based on what are called thirds, but you can have chords that are built off fourths or fifths or other kinds of exotic intervals. You can pull chords from different cultural music styles that are a bit different from our normal classical and pop music styles. So there's a whole lot of different options to create either a more familiar sound with those triads and simple third bass chords, or you get into these more exotic chords that can create more of an alien kind of sound, which is really good, especially in film music or video game music when you're doing kind of a sci-fi sound, or you want to create a little bit of suspense in your listener. Now, one of the other cool things about harmony, which has to do with it being the vertical aspect of pitch, is that when you have a chord, a certain set of notes, you can actually move those notes, keep the same letter names across the pitch spectrum in different ways, rearrange them, duplicate some of them in different octaves across the keyboard, which will keep the same emotional flavor, but it'll actually, change the sort of nuance of those individual chords, which allows you to keep a similar vibe through your music, but then you can have some nuance and some differences to keep it interesting. So it's important to start with individual chords, individual sonorities when you're talking about harmony, just to get going. But The real power in harmony is when you can actually go from one chord to the next in what's called a chord progression. And it's that chord progression, that contrast between one chord to the next, that allows you to create that emotional roller coaster for your listener. So you start with more of a brighter tone and go to a darker tone. That creates a sense of sadness or things coming down. And if you go the opposite direction from dark to light or into a brighter sound, you can create kind of a happy or uplifting kind of flavor. And just you can take your listener through that storyline with this mood that you're shaping with your harmonies. Now, when you're first getting started with chord progressions, one of the great things is that there's only so many common chord progressions, especially in popular music styles, that you would actually use. And if you look at a lot of pop songs, they actually use the same chords and they just rearrange it with different kinds of sounds and melodies and rhythms over top of it to help make it unique. But a great example of this is that classic Axis of Awesome video where they mash up a whole bunch of different pop songs that use one of the most common chord progressions, which is a 1, 5, minor 6, 4 chord progression, which is used in tons and tons of popular music songs, as well as even some classical music and jazz and other styles as well. Now, the last thing I really want to talk about when it comes to harmony is the term harmony itself. So outside of music, harmony pretty much means that everything's working perfectly. There aren't any bumps in the road. Everybody's getting along just fine. Everything's in harmony. But in music, harmony includes both the groups of pitches, the kinds of chords that sound pleasing to the ear, which are called consonant harmonies, but it also includes those pitch groups that sound displeasing to the ear, which are called dissonant harmonies. And it's actually that play between dissonance and harmony, that building up of tension and release, that gives your music a lot of impact, a lot of feeling, and it really takes your listener on an emotional journey and sets the stage that you can put all the other elements of music, the melodies and the rhythms and the sounds, and really sets a stage for all of that. So when you start to learn how to use the play back and forth between dissonance and consonants in your chord progressions and in your harmonies, you can do a lot with your music. So let's say you're composing a score for an adventure video game, something like The Legend of Zelda or something like that. You actually are going to be using a lot of very consonant harmonies through most of the game, where you're adventuring, you're traveling, kind of creating this brighter, happier tone. But then you're going to save some of the more dissonant harmonies for when you run into a boss or you run into a pretty difficult puzzle and you're trying to enhance that sense of frustration or a little bit of that fear or anxiety in the gamer in this case, so that it just makes their experience that more intense. Same thing if it was a horror video game or a horror movie, you're going to probably use a lot more dissonance because it creates that sense of anxiety or fear and just keeps your viewer or your video game player on edge. So it just enhances that mood so that when they're playing, they just constantly stay on edge. And you can actually use the consonants to create a false sense of security so that it just makes the dissonance even that much more grating when you go back to them. So as you master these techniques of harmony, you can really start to take your listener on that roller coaster ride of emotion, which is what a lot of listeners are looking for. They want to have that feeling. You want to enhance an experience when there's video or video game playing at the same time. And the better you get with harmony, the more you're going to have that emotional impact on your listener. So there you have it. Harmony is really just the vertical nature of pitches in your music, and it allows you to control the emotional impact that you have on your listener. Now, before we jump into the next video, I want to know what harmonies that you find interesting. What chords and progressions do you use in your music making? So tell me all about it in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you're getting value from this series, smash that like button and consider subscribing for more content just like this. I'll see you in the next part where we're going to talk about the third essential element of music, melody.